The studio publicly announced Ronald Reagan as the star. The screenplay was so incomplete that Ingrid Bergman shot the final scene without knowing whether she was leaving or staying with the man she loved. And the song that defines the entire picture was almost cut because the composer could not stand it. Go.
Perhaps tomorrow we'll be on the plane.
Fact 20. Born in the B unit. Warner Brothers assigned Casablanca to its B unit. The budget was modest. The expectations were non-existent. Michael Curtiz was known inside the studio less for art than for speed. A Hungarian workhorse who could bring a picture in on time and under budget, who had been directing features since 1912 without once being mistaken for a genius. Bogart was available because George Raft had turned the part down. Bergman was on loan from a producer who considered the picture beneath her. No one involved believed they were making anything more than a routine wartime programmer, the kind of picture that opened, ran for a week, and vanished. The film that would eventually be called the greatest achievement in Hollywood history began its life as filler on a B-unit schedule. Fact 19. Script unfinished at roll.
Watch yourself. Be on guard. This place is full of vultures everywhere.
The screenplay was not finished when principal photography began on May 25, 1942. The Epstein brothers and Howard Koch were still writing pages as the cameras rolled, still delivering scenes the night before they were scheduled to shoot. Ingrid Bergman spent the entire production approaching the writers with a single question. Which man does Ilsa end up with, Rick or Laszlo? They could not give her an answer. She asked Michael Curtiz. He could not give her one either. The writers themselves had not yet decided, and they would not decide until the final week of production. An actress tasked with carrying the emotional weight of the most famous love triangle in cinema history was asked to do it blind. Fact 18. Reagan was announced first.
What is your nationality?
I'm a drunkard.
On January 2, 1942, Warner Brothers distributed a press release announcing that Ronald Reagan would star in Casablanca. It was not a rumor. It was an official studio declaration printed in The Hollywood Reporter and Variety. Reagan was genuinely in contention for Rick Blaine, and for a brief window, he was the publicly named lead. When the film was released 11 months later, with Humphrey Bogart in the role, the studio was forced to explain what had happened. Reagan, who would become a film star, then governor of California, then president of the United States, watched Casablanca years after leaving office and told the room that the part should have been his. The studio that had announced him as its lead never corrected the impression. Fact 17. Bogart's hidden lifts.
Who are you really, and what were you before? What did you do, and what did you think, huh?
Humphrey Bogart stood approximately 5'8". Ingrid Bergman stood 5'9". To ensure the leading man appeared taller than his leading lady on screen, Bogart wore lifts in his shoes and stood on wooden blocks during specific two-shots. In the scenes where Rick and Ilsa stand close together, looking into each other's eyes, Bogart is not standing on the floor. He is standing on a platform built by the props department, angled so the camera could not see the edge. The most enduring romantic icon in American cinema was manufactured 1 inch at a time by carpenters who were told to make Humphrey Bogart tall enough to be loved. Fact 16. The piano was fake.
How much trouble?
Too much trouble.
Well, now, don't you bow.
Dooley Wilson, who played Sam, was a professional drummer. He had been touring with bands since the 1920s, had played the Chicago jazz circuit, had recorded with respected musicians of the era. He had never touched a piano. Every note of As Time Goes By that appears on screen was mimed. Every chord, every key press, every melancholic look toward the keyboard. A studio pianist named Elliot Carpenter sat just off camera, positioned so Wilson could see his hands and match the finger movements in real time. The voice was entirely his. The hands were a complete fabrication. Warner Brothers was so concerned audiences would notice that they shot Wilson from the waist up for every musical number. Fact 15. The Nazi who fled Nazis. Conrad Veidt, who played the cold and methodical Major Strasser, had fled Germany in 1933 with his Jewish wife. He was on the Gestapo's kill list. Nazi propaganda had designated him a traitor to the Reich. His films were banned, his name removed from every public record the regime could access. When the script required him to threaten, intimidate, and kill, he was acting opposite extras who had escaped the same regime that wanted him dead. Many of the background performers in Rick's Café were Jewish refugees who had reached Los Angeles in the late 1930s and found work on studio lots doing what refugees have always done, standing in the background while stories are told about them and without them. The man playing the film's primary Nazi was a man the Nazis had already sentenced to death in absentia. He played the monster to feed his family. Fact 14. The composer hated the song. Max Steiner was the most accomplished composer at Warner Brothers. He had scored King Kong and Gone with the Wind. He was Viennese, classically trained, a man who took his work with great seriousness, and he hated As Time Goes By. He found it sentimental, pedestrian, beneath his abilities. He lobbied the studio repeatedly for permission to write an original song to replace it, something darker, more orchestral, more dignified. The studio was prepared to grant his request, but by the time Steiner made his case, Ingrid Bergman had already cut her hair short for her next picture, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Reshoots were impossible. The song Steiner despised stayed in the picture because a woman had gotten a haircut. It became the defining musical motif of the most beloved film ever made. The composer went to his grave believing he was right. Fact 13. Real refugees, real tears. When Rick's Café Américain rises to sing La Marseillaise, when Yvonne shouts through tears, when the entire room drowns out the German officers singing Die Wacht am Rhein, those are not tears of performance. The extras were actual refugees who had fled Nazi-occupied Europe, who had lost homes and families and countries, who had arrived in Los Angeles with nothing and found work standing in the backgrounds of films. Madeleine LeBeau, who plays Yvonne, had fled Paris with her Jewish husband, Marcel Dalio, who also appears in the film as Émile the croupier. The couple had escaped France through Lisbon, the same route the film's characters are desperate to take. When LeBeau cries on screen, she is crying for the country she cannot return to. The most powerful sequence in Casablanca was not written, it was real. Fact 12. Bring on empty horses. Michael Curtiz was born Mano Kertész Kamener in Budapest in 1886. By 1942, he had directed more than 100 films across Hungary, Austria, and the United States. His English, after nearly 2 decades in Hollywood, remained a disaster. He was notorious on set for mangling the language into near incomprehensible directives. His most famous piece of direction was reportedly delivered while setting up the climactic airport farewell. Curtis looked across the set, gestured at the fog machines in the cardboard airplane, and said, "Separate togetherness, and bring on the empty horses." The crew stared at him in silence, then did what they believed he meant. The director, who could not communicate in English, directed the most quotable English language film ever made. Fact 11. Henried hated his role. Paul Henried was a respected European stage actor who had fled Vienna after the Anschluss and rebuilt his career in Hollywood. When offered the role of Victor Laszlo, the heroic Czech resistance leader, he accepted reluctantly. Henried detested the part. He found Laszlo humorless, dramatically inert, a cardboard martyr with nothing to do but stand behind Ilsa with noble bearing, while Bogart got every interesting line. He begged Curtis and Wallace for opportunities to inject dimension into the character. A moment of doubt, a flash of anger, anything human beneath the icon. He was repeatedly told no. Laszlo was the symbol, not the story. The performance Henried considered the most embarrassing of his career became the role for which he is best remembered. He spent the rest of his life being recognized on the street for work he was ashamed to have done. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. Most of you watching right now aren't subscribed, and that's the one thing that tells YouTube to show you the next video. One tap, that's all it takes. Fact 10. Nobody wanted Bergman. Ingrid Bergman was not Warner Brothers' first choice for Ilsa Lund. She was not their second or third. The studio wanted Ann Sheridan, unavailable. They pursued Hedy Lamarr, tied to an exclusive MGM contract. Bergman was on loan from David O. Selznick, who actively campaigned against her taking the role. Selznick believed Casablanca was a minor picture that would do nothing for the star he was positioning for prestige productions. He lobbied her to decline. He negotiated for a higher loan-out fee, assuming Warner Brothers would balk. He was wrong by every possible measure, creatively, commercially, historically. The actress nobody wanted became the face of the most beloved love story ever filmed. Fact 9. 3 possible endings. Producer Hal Wallace seriously considered 2 alternative endings during the final weeks of production. In the first, Rick shoots Strasser and escapes Casablanca with Ilsa. In the second, Laszlo is killed and Rick and Ilsa board together, united in tragedy. The ending audiences know, Rick walking into the fog beside Captain Renault, was finalized only days before the scene was shot. Wallace made the decision alone, over the objections of executives who believed an unhappy ending would damage the box office. The fog sequence wrapped on August 3, 1942. The most famous conclusion in cinema history was a bet placed against conventional wisdom with less than a week of production remaining. Fact 8. The airport was cardboard. The fog-shrouded airport terminal where Rick delivers his parting words to Ilsa was not an airport. It was Stage 1 at Warner Brothers, dressed with a forced perspective set and a cardboard cutout of a Lockheed Electra. The set was built to 1/4 scale. Stage hands dressed as ground crew were positioned at intervals behind the plane and instructed to walk slowly to create the illusion of distance. The fog was not an atmospheric choice. It was a practical necessity, pumped in specifically to conceal how unconvincing the set looked from any angle. What reads on screen as moody, poetic farewell was a solution to not having the budget to build anything larger than a suggestion of an airport. The film's most visually iconic sequence exists because Warner Brothers would not pay for a real runway. Fact 7. Operation Torch saved it. Casablanca was originally scheduled for a routine early 1943 release, slotted into Warner Brothers' spring calendar alongside several other wartime programmers. Then, on November 8, 1942, Allied forces launched Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, and captured the actual city of Casablanca. Warner Brothers executives recognized the opportunity within hours. They rushed the premiere forward to November 26th, opening the film at the Hollywood Theater in New York to ride the wave of headlines. A motion picture made with no particular urgency became overnight a piece of breaking news. The real battle for North Africa turned a B picture about a love triangle into an event. Timing, which no one on the production had planned for, made Casablanca feel essential. Fact 6. Poker created the catchphrase. "Here's looking at you, kid," was never in the script. By multiple accounts, Humphrey Bogart used the phrase off-camera while teaching Ingrid Bergman how to play poker between setups. The 2 actors, having almost nothing in common and little natural chemistry, had developed a ritual of card games during the long waits while the unfinished script was being revised elsewhere on the lot. Bogart, dealing hands to Bergman in his low, gravelly monotone, would raise his glass and say the line. Julius Epstein overheard it. He recognized the quality and wove it into the dialogue. The most celebrated romantic refrain in American cinema originated as filler conversation during a poker lesson between 2 actors who were supposed to be working. Bogart never claimed credit for the line, and Epstein never denied where he had heard it. Fact 5. 7 writers, 1 Oscar. 7 credited screenwriters worked on Casablanca during its chaotic development, and several more contributed without credit. Julius and Philip Epstein, twin brothers from the Lower East Side, wrote the majority of the dialogue and established the rapid-fire tone that defines the picture. Howard Koch handled the political framework and the architecture of resistance versus self-preservation. Casey Robinson, entirely uncredited, wrote the Paris flashback sequence. Every critical romantic scene between Rick and Ilsa, including the champagne toasts and the rain-soaked farewell at the train station. The script that won Best Adapted Screenplay was assembled by committee under extreme deadline pressure, with pages arriving on set still damp from the mimeograph machine. And yet the finished work reads as though it was written in a single inspired sitting by one person who knew exactly what they were doing. Fact 4. The line never spoken. "Play it again, Sam," is the most widely misquoted line in film history. The actual dialogue consists of Ilsa saying, "Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by." Later, Rick says, "You played it for her, you can play it for me. If she can stand it, I can. Play it." The word again is spoken by no character at any point. The line that has been quoted, parodied, printed on posters, and absorbed into the common language of romance does not exist. The most famous quotation in movie history is a collective hallucination so powerful that even people who have seen the film multiple times will swear Bogart says it. He does not. The line was invented by audiences, not by the film. Fact 3, Jack Warner stole the Oscar. At the 16th Academy Awards on March 2, 1944, Casablanca was named Best Picture. Producer Hal Wallace, the man who had guided every creative decision, hired the writers, approved every script page, cast every role, supervised the editing, and fought the censors, rose from his seat and began walking toward the stage. Before he reached the podium, studio head Jack Warner stood up, walked past him, climbed the steps, and accepted the Oscar himself. Wallace, seated in the audience, watched another man claim credit for his work in front of the entire industry. Warner posed with the statuette. Wallace left the studio 3 weeks later and never returned, ending a 20-year relationship with the studio he had helped build. He would produce 20 more films and receive the Irving Thalberg Award, but he never spoke about the night Jack Warner took Casablanca without asking. Fact 2, censors almost killed it. Casablanca came within a single censor's objection of losing its final line. The Production Code Administration flagged Captain Renault's closing instruction, "Round up the usual suspects," as a depiction of a police officer ordering an unjust arrest. The code explicitly prohibited portrayals of law enforcement as corrupt or morally compromised. The line was approved only after a Warner Brothers executive argued, in a formal written appeal, that removing it would damage the integrity of the picture beyond repair. That the line was not a joke at the expense of justice, but a comment on the moral compromises required to survive under occupation. The censors, perhaps to their own surprise, agreed. The film's most sardonic punchline survived by argument in the thinnest possible margin. It could as easily have been deleted and replaced with something obedient. Fact 1, she didn't know the ending. Only 2 people on set knew how Casablanca would end while the cameras were rolling for the final sequence: Humphrey Bogart and Michael Curtis. The final pages of the script had not been distributed to the rest of the cast. Claude Rains did not know whether Captain Renault would help Rick escape or turn him in. Paul Henried did not know whether Laszlo would board the plane or die on the tarmac. And Ingrid Bergman, the woman on whose face the entire emotional weight of the ending would fall, did not know whether Ilsa would leave with Rick or leave with Laszlo. Curtis instructed her to play the moment ambiguously. She was to look at one man and then the other. She was to search their faces with equal weight, equal longing, equal loss. She was to give no indication of what she wanted because she could not be told what she was supposed to want. The most famous farewell in cinema history was delivered by an actress who had been given no information about the outcome of the scene she was performing.